The station was quiet at night. Almost too quiet. Nexus Verity was a massive ring of metal and light floating somewhere between 3 star systems, a place where alien diplomats shook hands, or claws, or tentacles, and signed papers that decided the fate of entire worlds. During the day it buzzed with noise and movement. But at night, especially on the 24th of December, most of the corridors were empty. Danny Cole liked it that way. He was 34 years old, originally from a small town in Ohio, and he had been working the night shift on the diplomatic wing for almost 2 years. His job was simple. Mop the floors. Empty the bins. Make sure the halls looked clean before the important people came back in the morning. Nobody paid much attention to him, and honestly, he preferred it that way. He pushed his cart slowly down the grand corridor outside the Draconis diplomatic suite. The walls here were tall and dark, carved with patterns that the dragon species used to mark places of importance. Danny had mopped under those carvings hundreds of times. He still did not know what they meant. Tonight, though, his cart looked a little different. Tucked along the side of it was a small string of colored lights, blinking softly in red and green. Balanced on top of his cleaning supply shelf was a tiny plastic Christmas tree, no taller than his forearm. He had also brought a small speaker, which played old holiday songs at a volume low enough that only he could hear them. None of this was regulation. None of this was approved. But it was December 24th, and Danny was far from home, and he figured nobody was going to notice anyway. He was humming along to a slow version of a Christmas song when he heard a door open. It was not a small door. It was the large double-panel entrance to the main Draconis chamber, and it swung open with a heavy sound that echoed down the corridor. Danny stopped humming. He looked up. She filled the doorway. Velithra, princess of the Draconis sovereign, stood at least 9 feet tall. Her scales were deep violet with edges that caught the light like gold. Her eyes were large and still and completely unreadable. She wore the formal sash of her royal house across her chest, and she looked like someone who had never once in her life done anything without a reason. She looked at Danny. Then she looked at his cart. Then she looked at the little blinking lights. Danny did not run. He did not bow. He just nodded, the way he would nod at anyone he passed in a hallway. "Evening," he said. Velithra said nothing for a moment. Dragons were not easily surprised. But her eyes moved slowly from the tiny plastic tree to the blinking lights to the small speaker and back to the human standing there in his work uniform. "What," she said finally, in perfect Galactic standard, "are you doing?" Danny looked at his cart, then back at her. "It is Christmas Eve," he said simply. She stared at him. The word meant nothing to her. Her translator gave her the phonetic shape of it, but no meaning beyond that. She stood in the doorway of one of the most powerful diplomatic suites on the station, a princess of a species that had ruled star systems for 3,000 years, and she waited. Danny shrugged. "You got a few minutes?" he asked. "I can explain." The maintenance break room was not a beautiful place. It had 3 plastic chairs, a folding table with a crack running down the middle, a heating unit that made a small clicking noise every few minutes, and a cabinet full of instant drink packets. The walls were plain gray. There was one window, but it faced an interior corridor, so there was nothing to see through it. Danny set 2 cups of hot cocoa on the table. He had made them from packets he kept in his cart for long shifts. He slid one toward the side of the table where Velithra could reach it, then sat down with his own. She looked at the cup for a moment. Then she picked it up with 2 fingers, carefully, the way someone might handle something they were not sure was safe. Danny drank his without ceremony. "So," he said, "Christmas." He thought about where to start. He did not start with the religious part, or the shopping part, or any of the parts that were hard to explain. He started with the oldest part. "Winter is the darkest time of year," he said. "Back on Earth, a long time ago, people were scared of it. The days got short. The nights got cold. Things stopped growing. And people used to die in winters that were bad enough." Velithra listened without moving. Dragons were excellent listeners. They processed information the way a machine processes data, collecting it, sorting it, storing it. "So humans decided to fight it," Danny continued. "Not with weapons or anything like that. Just with lights. And warmth. And food. And being together. They would gather in the middle of the worst part of winter and just celebrate. On purpose. Even though things were hard. Valethra's head tilted very slightly to one side. That is not efficient, she said. No, Danny agreed. It is not. Why give objects to others? She asked. Resources are more efficiently distributed through formal tribute systems. Danny smiled a little. He had not expected a dragon princess to get straight to the economics of gift-giving, but here they were. A gift is not tribute, he said. Tribute is what you give because you have to. A gift is what you give because you want to. Because you thought about someone and found something that made you think of them. The point is the thinking. The caring. She was quiet for a moment, processing that. Danny looked at his cocoa and started talking about Ohio. He talked about his mother's kitchen and how it smelled on Christmas morning. He talked about his father climbing up on the roof every year to hang lights, and how he nearly fell off every single time, and how they all stood below watching and half laughing and half terrified. He talked about staying up too late and sleeping in too long and eating too much and none of it mattering because the whole point was just to be there together. He had not talked about any of this in a long time. Valethra listened to all of it. When he finished, there was a short silence. Then she said something that she had not planned to say. It came out before the formal part of her brain could stop it. Dragon royal children do not have that. Danny looked at her. We have formal dinners, she said, in a slightly more careful voice. Ancestral ceremonies. Political briefings with senior family members. These are important. They are structured. They serve a purpose. But nobody just sits around? Danny asked. No, she said. That would not be appropriate. Danny was quiet for a moment. He looked at this 9-foot dragon princess sitting in a plastic chair in a maintenance break room, holding a cup of hot cocoa with 2 fingers, and he said the thing that was true. That sounds lonely. Valethra did not answer right away. No one had ever said that to her before. She was not sure anyone had ever been allowed to say that to her before. Danny finished his cocoa and stood up. You want to see the rest of what I brought? He asked. It turned out Danny had been preparing for weeks. Not for a party. Not for a gathering. Just for himself, because the alternative was spending Christmas Eve mopping empty floors in silence, and he had decided he was not going to let the holiday disappear just because he was 60,000 light-years from home. He pulled things out of his cart one by one and set them on the corridor floor. A handwritten list of Christmas things he wanted to do before his shift ended. A bag of cinnamon candies, the small hard kind that came in a paper twist. A folded stack of paper snowflakes he had cut himself on his lunch breaks over the past 2 weeks. A paper star, slightly crumpled at one point, that he had made from a piece of yellow maintenance paper. Valethra watched all of this come out of a cleaning cart with an expression that was hard to read. You made these? She asked, holding up one of the paper snowflakes. Yeah, Danny said. It is easy. You just fold the paper and cut little shapes into it. When you unfold it, it looks like a snowflake. She turned it slowly in her clawed fingers, studying the small cut shapes with the same focused attention she would give a diplomatic document. Danny took a small roll of tape from his cart and looked up at the corridor's tall archways. These walls are high, he said. I was going to need a ladder. Valethra looked at the archway. Then she reached up without a word and pressed the first snowflake against the stone, holding it in place while Danny tore a strip of tape and stuck it down. She moved to the next arch. And the next. Neither of them discussed it. She was tall enough to reach places Danny would have spent 20 minutes setting up a ladder for. He handed her snowflakes and tape. She placed them. It was a simple arrangement, and it worked. They were halfway down the corridor when Pete Garland showed up. Pete worked communications and had a habit of wandering the station when he could not sleep. He was wearing his off-duty jacket and holding a coffee that had clearly gone cold. He stopped walking when he saw the snowflakes on the archways, and the lights on the cart, and the dragon princess standing in the middle of the diplomatic corridor holding a strip of tape. He looked at Danny. Is this a thing now? He asked. It is a thing now, Danny said. Pete grabbed a handful of snowflakes and started helping. Sevik came next. He was a 4-armed maintenance worker who had shared a shift with Danny for almost 2 years. He did not say anything when he arrived. He just looked at the situation, picked up 2 snowflakes in 2 of his hands, and found a spot on the wall. Clara Dunn, a young medical intern pulling an overnight shift, heard the music from 3 corridors away and followed it out of curiosity. She was the only one who said anything about how strange this was. "Are we allowed to do this?" she asked. "Nobody said we could not," Danny replied. She stayed. The corridor changed slowly. Paper snowflakes hung from dark alien archways. The little speaker played its quiet songs. The bag of cinnamon candies made its way around the group, and Sevik held one in his upper hand and sniffed it carefully before deciding it was safe to try. Clara recorded a short voice message home. Pete fell asleep briefly against the wall and nobody woke him up. Velithra stood in the middle of all of it, holding the last paper snowflake, and looked at what had become of the corridor in the past hour. Then she said, quietly, almost to herself, "Is this what your species was protecting? When you negotiate for cultural rights in diplomatic sessions, is this what that is about?" Danny pressed a snowflake against the wall and smoothed the tape down. "Among other things, yeah," he said. She looked at the snowflake in her hand for a long moment. Then she reached up and placed it on the highest arch in the corridor, the one above the door to her own suite, and pressed it flat. The observation deck was the best place on the station to see the stars. It was a wide curved room at the outer edge of the ring, with a long transparent viewport that looked out into open space. During the day it was used for official meetings when someone needed to impress a visiting delegate. At night, it was usually empty. The small group drifted there without anyone suggesting it. Pete came back fully awake after his nap. Clara tucked her comm away after finishing her voice message home. Sevik walked quietly beside Danny's cart as they moved through the corridors. Velithra came last, stepping through the viewport door and settling near the far side where the ceiling was high enough to accommodate her. They stood or sat in the dim light and looked out at the stars. In the far distance, there was a yellow star. Not Earth's sun. Not even close, really. But it was the same color, and Danny found himself staring at it longer than he meant to. Pete fell asleep again almost immediately, this time in a wide observation chair with his arms folded. Clara sat on the floor with her back against the wall, quiet and comfortable. Sevik settled cross-legged in the middle of the room with his eyes closed. Danny stood at the viewport. After a while, Velithra moved to stand beside him. She was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars drift slowly past. "Why did you not go home for this holiday?" she asked. Danny thought about how to answer that honestly. "Contract work out here does not pay the same as it does closer to the core systems," he said. "Travel back to Earth costs more than I make in 2 months. And the shift schedule does not line up with the calendar the way you would need it to. So you just stay. And you make do." Velithra said nothing for a moment. "You did not make do," she said. "You made this." Danny looked at her, a little surprised. She was looking out at the stars, not at him, but her voice was careful and deliberate, the way it was when she was saying something she had considered. "My species has conquered 14 star systems," she said. "We hold treaty rights over 6 resource corridors. We have courts and academies and military traditions that are 3,000 years old. In all of that time, in all of that history, we have never once made what you made tonight out of paper and sugar and small lights." Danny did not say anything. "It was nothing," he said after a moment. "It was not nothing," she said. "I have sat through 200 formal diplomatic dinners. I have attended 37 ancestral ceremonies. I have been present for the signing of 9 interstellar treaties. None of them felt like that corridor felt tonight." The station hummed quietly around them. Somewhere behind them, Pete made a small sound in his sleep. Then Velithra reached into the formal sash across her chest, the one that held official documents and royal seals, and removed something small. She placed it on the viewport ledge in front of Danny. It was a scale. Deep violet, edged in gold, about the size of his palm. "In Draconis culture," she said, "a scale given willingly carries a specific meaning. It is not a treaty. It is not tribute. It is not an alliance. It is personal. It means, you are seen. You are acknowledged. Not your rank or your function. You, specifically." She paused. She called it a gift, saying the word carefully, as if she had just learned it and was trying it for the first time. Danny stared at the scale for a long moment. Then he reached into his cart and took out the paper star, The yellow one, slightly crumpled at one corner, the one he had made himself and never found a place to put up. He set it on the viewport ledge beside her scale. They stood there in the quiet. At midnight, Danny said softly, to no one in particular, "Merry Christmas." Behind them, Sevik opened one eye. "Merry Christmas," he said, in slow and badly pronounced English. Clara laughed. Pete woke up just long enough to mumble the same words before falling asleep again. Velithra looked at the paper star beside her scale on the ledge. She did not say the words. But she did not look away from the star. December 25th came in quietly. The station woke up the way it always did, slowly, with lights cycling on in the corridors and the hum of systems shifting into daytime mode. The diplomatic wing filled up again with the sound of doors opening and footsteps and the distant noise of translation units being switched on. Pete woke up in the observation chair with a cinnamon candy stuck to the side of his face. He peeled it off, looked at it for a second, and ate it. Clara had already gone back to the medical bay hours ago, leaving a small note on the chair that just said, "Best shift ever." Sevik returned to maintenance without ceremony, the way he did everything, though he had tucked one paper snowflake carefully into the pocket of his work suit. Danny came back to the diplomatic corridor and started the actual cleaning. The paper snowflakes were still up. He looked at them for a moment, decided nobody had told him to take them down, and left them where they were. He mopped the floor under them. He emptied the bins. He did his job. Velithra was already dressed and back in her diplomatic suit when her aide knocked to say the treaty briefing team would arrive in 4 hours. She sent the aide away and sat alone in the suite for a while. Then she opened a channel to the Draconis Cultural Ministry back home. The connection took a moment to stabilize across the distance. When it did, she spoke clearly and without hesitation. She told them she had participated in a human cultural observance the previous night, an informal gathering centered around a tradition called Christmas. She said it was her personal recommendation that Draconis diplomatic staff receive a proper briefing on informal human traditions, not as political intelligence or strategic analysis, but as context, so that they could understand what humans valued and why, and speak to them accordingly. There was a pause on the line. The ministry official asked if this had been an official cultural exchange event. "No," she said. "It was personal." Another pause. "Who hosted the event?" the official asked. She gave them Danny's name and his employee identification number. The silence that followed was longer this time. "A sanitation worker," the official said. Velithra kept her voice completely steady. "The most effective cultural ambassador I have encountered in 3 years of diplomatic rotation," she said. "Please update the record. His contribution should be noted formally." The ministry official said they would look into the proper classification for such a notation. She closed the channel. Meanwhile, Danny was mopping the same corridor, completely unaware that his name had just been entered into a Draconis royal diplomatic record. He was humming again, the same song as the night before, because old habits were comfortable and the corridor was long. His comm unit beeped once. He picked it up. The message was from an official Draconis diplomatic address, the kind with the formal seal embedded in the header. He stared at it for a second, thinking maybe he had accidentally mopped too close to something important. The message was 4 words. It said, "The star was a good gift," and then, at the end, a single initial, V. Danny read it twice. He stood in the middle of the corridor with his mop in one hand and his comm in the other, and he smiled the kind of smile that takes up the whole face without any effort at all. He tucked the comm back into his pocket and kept mopping. The paper snowflakes stayed up for 3 weeks after that. Station administration eventually noticed them during a routine corridor inspection and filed a query about unauthorized decorations. The query was reviewed. A response came back 2 days later from the Draconis diplomatic office, stating that the decorations were culturally significant and should remain until further notice. Nobody argued with the Draconis diplomatic office. The snowflakes stayed up until the end of January.